So we got Tee Higgins franchise tagged, Sam Hubbard retires, and then Trey Hendrickson on the trade block. Welcome back to the show, guys. Still don't have a segment title for this. I'm Corey from Play Action Sports, or better known as Bengals from the Champion Bengals podcast. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. We're going to be going over kind of what this week was in Bengals land right now. We got a lot to unpack here. Not good stuff, to say the least. Not good stuff. I'm sure we're all collectively frustrated. I'm as frustrated as ever. If this season wasn't frustrating enough, they decided to start the offseason off with all the current controversy that is right now. And it's not looking good. Not looking good. Very frustrating if you're a Bengals fan. So I got a couple videos, some from ESPN. Then we got some from Florio on NBC here. We also got Andrew Whitworth's comments on what the Bengals are doing on the Pat McAfee show. Some stuff we want to kind of unpack and just collectively talk about. Like, the biggest thing here is, if you guys are new to the channel, I just want to create a little bit of community around, Bengals fans out there, kind of get the chit-chat going and see where everybody's head's at. Because to me, this is as frustrating as ever being a Bengals fan right now, and we got a lot to unpack and figure out how this team can collectively get better and move forward and get back to that Super Bowl that we were in a couple of years ago. So I think the first topic we're going to dive into is that Tee Higgins franchise tag. I'm going to pull up a video here on ESPN. We're going to kind of dive into this, see what they're saying, and then kind of touch on that. And I want to get your thoughts, so leave them down in the comments too.
Breaking news into NFL Live coming out of Cincinnati, and as has been expected, with 24 hours to go before the tag deadline, wide receiver Tee Higgins has been tagged for the second year in a row. He is just the second wide receiver to be franchised twice by the same team. The other was Chris Godwin, who signed a long-term deal with Tampa shortly after he was tagged a few years ago. And this was Tee Higgins' response. Quite simply, tag. Adam Schefter joins us now. Adam, what more can you tell us?
Hannah, this was the expected outcome in the Tee Higgins situation that still is unfolding as we speak. I don't think we've heard anything close to the last of the Tee Higgins situation, but this marks the second straight year that the Bengals have used their franchise tag on Tee Higgins to take him really out of unrestricted free agency. It's a 26.2.
Okay, before we get it, let's just get this out of the way. Like, Tee Higgins was never getting to free agency. We already talked about if they did not tag him, that was just malpractice from the start. So you obviously had to tag him to have all the leverage. Even if you're going to trade him, you want the leverage, and then you go from there. So, like, people assuming that this guy was going to hit free agency, it was never going to happen. But to not have contracts done to this point is a little bit frustrating from my perspective, and I'm sure your perspective out there too. But the lack of being on top of these things, and from the quote unquote not being close on the contract talks is pretty sad to hear.
$1 million franchise tag, and the Bengals were quick to point out that their intent is to work towards a long-term deal. Now, my understanding is the two sides at this time are not close to a long-term deal. On the open market, Tee Higgins would command north of $30 million a year. The franchise tag number right now is 26.2. So clearly there is work to be done between the two sides, and were he to hit the open market, there would be a team that would be paying him $30+ million a year. But the Bengals right now are not willing to do that. So we'll see if the two sides can figure out their differences, but this is one of any number of issues the Bengals had this offseason. They still want to get a deal worked out with Jamar Chase, but the focus for now is on Tee Higgins. They still have to deal with Trey Hendrickson, who led the league in sacks last year and wants a new deal. Plenty of financial issues in Cincinnati, but they have now placed the franchise tag on Tee Higgins.
So they have taken the first step as Dan Orlovsky and Mina Kimes join us now. Dan, let me start with you. What are your thoughts about this move?
Makes sense. I just don't know how it's going to end, and that's going to be the fascinating part. And Shefty knows a little bit more than me, but to my mind, it's like one of three things can really happen. Number one, that Tee Higgins plays on that franchise tag and signs it. I just feel like that's unlikely. Number two, this gives them more time in Cincinnati with Tee to get out a long-term deal that gets signed. Or three, and I want to see if this is when it gets really interesting, is does it be a opportunity or become an opportunity where they trade him and now he just doesn't walk out of their building, but they can use that franchise tag as a way to give a team an opportunity to put together a package that they want to use to trade for Tee Higgins and then sign him, because I just don't see how Cincinnati can sign Tee Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, and Jamar Chase and field any type of competitive football team moving forward.
Man, okay, so we already talked about all the cuts and everything that's happened, right? Like, they were this close from the playoffs last year. And if it weren't for some brutal coaching errors in certain situations and brutal management, play calling, things that we need to shore up here, this team would be in the playoffs. Brutal starts to the season. Like, we shouldn't have even been in that position with the talent that we had. And it was sad to see. So with the cap space that we have right now, yeah, you can sign these guys. And if you manipulate the money in the cap properly, then you can still have money to spend elsewhere. But it just comes down to the fact that, like Dan is stating here, it's the rhetoric in the sense that the Bengals are not going to give money up front and they're not going to do what it's going to take to field a team, or it's going to cost a lot of upfront money and going from there. And that's just the problem. And it's the narratives that we get all the time now because of the fact that the Bengals do business the way they do business, which is unfortunately sad. And if they don't start to get with the now, I think they're going to have a lot more problems down the line. And we'll touch on that as we get through to some of these videos.
Yeah, especially because, Dan, all of the needs they have on defense. I mean, I was just looking at the roster trying to figure out what positions they should target in the draft. Every position is one that they have to get better at on defense, right? Defensive tackle, edge, opposite Hendrickson, linebacker, cornerback, safety. They all have needs. So if they were to try to get a deal done with Higgins, and I understand the impetus given how successful they've been in offense, they would have to have the draft of their lives in Cincinnati to get better on that side of the ball. As far as the tag and trade option goes, I agree with Dan. I'm interested in seeing if there's any reports of interest in the next few days or the coming week or so, because there's great need on a number of teams that have a lot of cap space. And with Higgins off the market, if Chris Godwin were to stay in Tampa, it's not a great group of receivers. And Dan and I were talking about this too. It's not a particularly great receiver draft. So if I'm a team like the Patriots, the Commanders, the Chargers, I'm calling and seeing if it's a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to get done, but I'm just calling to see if there's a possibility.
And Mina, I think that's exactly what is going to be going on across the league right now. Again, the Bengals have not advertised their intentions other than trying to get a long-term deal worked out with Tee Higgins, which is what they should be saying, because number one, they should want the player. But if they can't get a deal done, then they should be looking to deal Tee Higgins. And there are people across the league who believe that this could wind up being a tag and trade. Now, we don't know whether that will happen, but I can tell you that there are people around the league who believe a tag and trade is possible here with Tee Higgins, despite the fact that the Bengals have said their intent is to sign him to a long-term deal.
The timing of all this is so fascinating, though, because with free agency a week away, essentially, in the NFL, Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson are going to have, obviously, markets. And so you can't wait that long to figure out the potential trade partners if you're Cincinnati and the likelihood of that long-term deal getting done, because you can't allow those other two guys to potentially hit the market. And I think the priority for Cincinnati has to be Jamar Chase.
Okay. This is one thing I got to say. Dan just said you can't let Jamar get to free agency because he's going to have a market. if there was ever a world where they were to let that man walk out the door, I promise you, me, and I'm sure every other Bengals fan alike, would not be wearing these colors immediately after that were to happen. That would just be malpractice at the highest of highs, because a talent like Jamar Chase is generational. And to just let that walk out the door would not make any sense. So the fact that they even talk about that or entertain those ideas, to me, are wild, but that's the shit you get, unfortunately, when the Bengals front office does business the way that they do. And this is the shit I'm sure we're all sick of, is just being walked over. And every day you open up the screen, you got your front office being called cheap. You got everybody chewing apart this organization, and telling the players they should get out, they should demand a trade. Like, this is the shit we're all sick of. I'm sure you guys out there collectively are too. So that's half the reason we're going through this crap and trying to figure out a solution to getting this team to where it needs to be collectively and going from there. Sad.
Trey Hendrickson and then Tee Higgins, as much as I love Tee Higgins. So the timing's fascinating. The other part is this. T has a very specific body frame and role. And so if they come to a point where we're not going to get a deal done with Tee Higgins, one, you have to get draft capital for this year. I don't care about draft capital in the future, this year. And then two, they got to really go after and find a receiver that does replace a little bit of that body frame that T has, because of the style that Joe has in throwing guys open. You're looking at a 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" type of receiver to try to replicate how big of a productive player Tee Higgins has become.
Much more to come on this story. Much more work for the Bengals. We should mention they also released guard Alex Kappa today, and in doing so, they saved $17.6 million in cap space.
Funny enough, isn't that funny how they end that there at the end? It's just like, yeah, coincidentally, they also released Alex Kappa, and that freed up another, $9 million, right? Like, the amount of people that they've released so far, and the amount of not draft capital, the amount of cash they have currently, cap space, is, I don't know how you're arguing they don't have the money to do this. It is there. It is evident. They have the money to do this. It's whether or not they're going to structure these contracts and these deals appropriately and get with the times. And that's why we're on here, to push that envelope, to put pressure there. It's the same reason Joe Burrow went out there and he's like, listen, the Eagles did it. We can do it too. And you can. You just got to take that risk, and you got to do the things like give up front money and invest in these players to actually be competitive. Or else you're just stuck in the Andy Dalton era, and you're never going to get better. And you know what? The Bengals might just be an Andy Dalton team. They might just be mid, and that's what they do, because they don't want to pay to be a competent team in this league. And that's a sad thing to say, unfortunately, as a Bengals fan, but what are you going to do? But on to the next one. We got Chris Sims and Florio here talking about it's the Bengals as a whole and Tee Higgins on the franchise tag.
Straight the leverage that he has over the Bengals that
guys,
I'm not even sure the Bengals realize at this point. But it was not a mistake what he said about Tee Higgins. He was on with the guys at Pardon My Take at the Super Bowl. When I saw his comments and he started comparing the Eagles to the Bengals find a way to pay all their people. They've got two high-end receivers. They've got a tight end that's making good money.
Right,
They've got a
top-end running back.
Top of the market. They've got Saquon Barkley. They pay their guys. They find a way to make it work. Find a way to make it work. It reminds me, and I don't want to get specific about jobs I've had because I don't want to indirectly call anyone out, but you will from time to time encounter someone, whether it's something with your computer system at work or something. They'll tell you it can't be done. No, I'm sorry, it can't do that. No. You can find a way to do it if you really want to do it. Don't tell me it can't do it. Surely there's a way you can do it. And the Bengals' attitude will be, well, we just can't do it. We just can't do it. It can't be done.
Yeah.
Find a way to do it. And I think what the Bengals are trying to do, and feel free to prove me wrong, Duke Tobin, Mike Brown and company. I don't put this on Zach Taylor. I think Zach Taylor is kind of a helpless bystander in all this because when he signed on to be the coach of the Bengals, this is what he was getting.
Yeah,
this
that's
is the way they've been for as long as I've been covering the NFL.
Right.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
So I think they're going to try to do enough to make Joe Burrow think they attempted to sign Tee Higgins.
I hear you.
And maybe enough to make him think they tried to sign Jamar Chase long-term, although I think they're going to have to bite the bullet on Chase, which makes it even more likely they won't pay Higgins because I think Chase is in position to really break the bank, and he should. But they're going to make it look like they tried, and they're going to hope Joe Burrow buys it. And the question is going to be, will he buy it or will he see through it and say, you didn't really try? And you know what? Now isn't the time to try. The time to try was last year because it always gets more expensive if you wait. And they blew their window for signing Tee Higgins to a long-term deal last year. And it's going to be more expensive and harder this year.
So 2 parts to that. It's going to be more expensive and harder this year. Yeah. Did they blow their window? No. Cap went up. We can still sign all 3 of these guys. It's just, like I said, a matter of actually guaranteeing contracts and giving money to these players. As simple as that. But, yeah, they fucked this up as a whole because they took it slow and they didn't expect these guys to outperform their pay and it just went horribly wrong. And that's what you get for waiting on these things. You got other guys coming to the market, beating these contracts, beating the market. And they just keep playing this game of being behind the 8 ball, and it's finally caught up to them. And now it's make or break. Now you gotta put up or you gotta shut up with these players, and you're gonna have to pay these guys because you have a fan base that's losing their mind over this stuff. So let's get back to this video.
Yeah, it is, and I'm with you. Jamar Chase is a given. That's going to happen.
Given.
Right? The people of Cincinnati will take to the streets and pillage the city if Jamar Chase leaves town, let alone Joe Burrow's going to be like, peace, I'm out of here. I'd like to go play somewhere else.
See you later.
So I'm with you there. The Tee Higgins thing, I don't know either. With the history of Cincinnati, I go, yes, I'm not sure that'll happen. But to what Joe Burrow and you just alluded to a minute ago, like why can't it happen? Right? We just went over the 49ers and their football team yesterday and how they're constructed and that they have a top 2 or 3 paid player at about, 6 or 7 different positions we went through? The Bengals have Joe Burrow? And that's the only guy that they have that's in the top of the market conversation, right? Anywhere. I don't think I'm wrong with that. I'm just going off the top of my head here. All right? Trey Hendrickson should be, but he's being paid half the market compared to
less than half.
Right, less than half than what most people at his position are making. So because of that, I'm with Joe Burrow here and that, yeah, Bengals, it's time to pay the Pied Piper here and get it going. Yeah. And as we talked about last year, and we were kind of complaining early on in the season, the time is now. It's now. Burrows it's in the prime of his career. Chase are in the prime of the career. They're not going to get any better than what they are now in the next 2 or 3 years. So, this is the time to keep this nucleus together. You've shown the ability to beat the Ravens and be a pain in their butt. You've shown the ability that you can dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs on their field and really maybe be the only team they're kind of somewhat scared of or a little bit annoyed with. So that's where I don't get it. I'm hoping they get it done for Joe Burrow's sake. But, yeah, what is that magic number, Mike? What is the magic number that you think a guy like Tee Higgins is going to settle for as far as the yearly average? Some of the guys in front of him, right? Cooper Kupp's making 26.7. DJ Moore's making 20.
Okay, let's go back to that, what he just said there. Like, the time is now. It's now. And I don't think people realize, I don't even think the Brown family realizes and this organization realizes that this trio, this group of players that they have right now, this quarterback, this receiver duo, they may never have something like this. They may never have the talent at quarterback that they do right now. They may never have this again. Again. Could be for the next 50 years, could be for the next 100 years. You might never get the talent that you have right now. And the fact that you are playing it scared and not maximizing and investing everything you have into this to see if they can get a win, because that's what this is all about. Blows my mind, and it should blow your mind out there too, because it makes no fucking sense. Oh man, shaking my head.
27.5. Devontae Adams with that Fugazi contract the last few years is 28. Jalen Waddle's 28.25. I'd take Tee Higgins over Devontae Adams right now every day of the week. I'd take him over Jalen Waddle really too. So that's where I believe he kind of is as a player. And I told you, I think he's right up there. If you gave me a choice between Brandon Ayuk and Tee Higgins, I think I'd still take Tee Higgins there. And Ayuk's making $30 million. So what is that number that he's going to feel good about, that the agent's going to feel good about, and that the team is going to feel good about, that they can get this done? And that's what I don't know.
I think it's got to start with the 3. I think you got to have $60 million guaranteed over the first 2 years to get the trade.
That's basically right. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought too. Roundabout way, round number. That's kind of where I was as well. Right.
The problem is Chase wants 40.
Yeah.
And you could argue he should get 50 in new money. And the problem last year, they could have done Chase. They wanted to do Chase. The numbers were right, but the structure was caca, to use a technical term. That's my understanding.
Sorry,
why
Liverpool.
It went all the way
Sorry, Edinburgh.
right up until, I don't even know if caca is a bad word.
It sounds bad, though, so it was just a little give
certain
it.
words. Yeah. There are certain words that for them are very, very bad, and for us are last names of characters in sitcoms.
Yeah.
But then there's certain words that they just throw around that we were like, holy shit, you cannot say that. So I'm looking at the cap numbers for the Bengals players next year. Joe Burrow, 46.25. Tee Higgins now 26, and they have it as 26.179. So I'm off a little bit on my math. Jamar Chase, 21.8. Trey Hendrickson is 18.6. His cash is less than that. Orlando Brown Jr. at 15. Sam Hubbard at 11.5.
It's incredible.
Logan, who's asked to be traded, 7.9. Ted Karras, 6.3. Zach Moss, 4.8. And then you're at the kicker, 4.5 from Money Mac, Evan McPherson. So, yeah, there aren't a lot of crippling cap numbers for the Bengals, but it's always been about the money.
Yeah.
And I kind of respect Mike Brown for not parading around saying, we want to win the Super Bowl. We want to win the Super Bowl. If anything, he's saying, oh, man, when we go to the Super Bowl, it's really expensive because we've got to get all those hotel rooms for all the staff. We got to fly everybody there. How are we going to make that back? Right? That's the attitude of the Bengals.
Dude, how sad is that? This is what these guys talk about. How sad is that? That's wild.
For fans, see, that's the thing. Most owners think you have to act like you're trying to win the Super Bowl as a ruse to get your fans to keep showing up. You can be Mike Brown and just overtly be cheap, and they'll still show up for your games.
But will he get away with it this time? This is his kryptonite here. His name is Joe Burrow. Like you said, you're working on a project. Things have changed here. Joe, I don't know Joe that well, but I've been around him a few times in my life, right? Joe doesn't mess around. So this is where it's different. The day I was there, like I told you, to be around Joe Burrow, I mean, there was a few moments in interviews where we had to take a break because, higher-ups wanted to talk to him or he wanted to talk to them. This is a different animal. The Brown family's not going to be able to get away with some of the stuff they might have been able to get away with. Joe Burrow is too in love with football, in love with trying to be the greatest quarterback ever, right? He's too in love with, I'm looking at these other teams like the Eagles. I know, I'm a gym rat. I know what's going on all around the league. And that's where I think it's changed. And that's where I think this could get fun or messy. Or maybe, it could be a great symphony. I don't know if they can get it done. But either way, I do think it's changed because of the Joe Burrow effect and something you've alluded to from back at the draft.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that. It has changed. You get a quarterback of his caliber. Like, what are we doing here? What are we overthinking about this? They need to put everything they have into this guy. He has clearly shown you what he can do and what this team can do. Record numbers last year. It's embarrassing, the fact that they even have to think about trying to put as many resources into this team as they possibly can. And it's like you said, this could get messy. I mean, us as fans aren't going to sit here and just watch this happen again. When I was younger when the Carson Palmer years were here, but now I'm not as naive, and I'm sure there's a million of you guys out there feeling the exact same way. We're just not going to sit here and watch this mediocrity take place anymore. We're not taking stabs at actually trying to be a good team and win this entire thing. So it's sad. It really is sad to see.
Well, this is written in Playmakers, the book that came out 3 years ago. Not that having it in writing on paper makes it any more accurate than if I just say it. But this is 100% true, and Bengals fans get triggered every time I say this, and I would understand it. If I was a Bengals fan, I would too, because, again, the thing that makes me most upset is when somebody talks about my deepest fear. And if you're a Bengals fan right now, the deepest fear is Joe Burrow is going to take the ultimate page out of the Carson Palmer playbook. I'll get to that in a second. But I firmly believe, because it was explained to me exactly like this from someone who would know, if in 2020, when Joe Burrow was the clear, he had leapfrogged Tua as the clear most desirable number one, no doubt about it, player in the draft, the Bengals wouldn't even engage the Dolphins in trade talks for that number one overall pick because Stephen Ross was obsessed with getting Joe Burrow, almost as obsessed as he was with getting Tom Brady, and we saw how that ended up. But if Joe Burrow was from Athens, Georgia, and not Athens, Ohio, he would have not played for the Bengals. He would have refused to play. He would have pulled an Eli Manning on the Bengals. But because he's from Ohio, he gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Now, after 8 years with the Bengals, Carson Palmer said, I'm done. I'm out. That was in 2011. He stayed home all year long, was traded to the Raiders a day after Jason Campbell broke a collarbone, 2 days before the trade deadline. And the Raiders gave up way too much, and that ended Carson Palmer's time with the Bengals. Here's what Palmer said in 2019 about the Bengals and about why he decided I'm GTFOH. If the most important thing is the financials and the second most important thing is winning, then you don't have a chance. And it's so important that ownership is willing to do what it takes to win. That was 2019 regarding the decision he made in 2011 that after 8 years, he's had enough of Mike Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals. So here we are, Joe Burrow entering year 6, and he's put them on notice. His comments from this year are not a mistake. They're not a coincidence. They're not spontaneous. They are planned, they are strategic, and they should be regarded as ominous for the Cincinnati Bengals.
They should be.
And so you got to take care of Jamar, you got to take care of T, you got to take care of Trey. That's the mandate. And if they screw it up, it's not going to be enough to say, at least we tried. You know that gif of the Simpsons cake where it says, at least you tried, and he dumps it into the trash can? No. At least you tried isn't going to get it done. You got to do it. And if you don't do it, you're going to have a problem with Joe. Mark my words, you're going to have a problem with Joe Burrow.
Agreed. I'm with you there. Joe is not going to play with this subject here. And two, he shouldn't. Right? I mean, listen, if you're going to ask Joe Burrow to carry the team, then you got to put the pieces he wants to be around it. And that's what they've asked Joe Burrow to do. We're not ever sitting here going, oh, the Bengals and they're just unstoppable run game. Or are we ever sitting here going, whoa, the Bengals, I mean, the defense, nobody can move the ball. Lou Anarumo certainly did some cool things, and we were like, oh, wow, those are creative and some of that stuff. But it was never like, oh, they're dominant. So it's got to be one or the other. Either you got to build the team and make the team really good for Joe Burrow and have it solid throughout with depth, and it doesn't look like they're doing that right now, and they're a little bit far off in that department. So if you're not going to do that, then you better let Joe B have his stars around him so he can just go boom, boom,
Yes,
boom,
sir.
and look at me. I'm 27 for 30 for 340 and 3 touchdowns, and I carried us. But you can't do both of these things to him, or that's going to make him unhappy. And I think that's where we're at. I mean, he's looking at it going, wait, we've had offensive line issues. Now last year, we don't have anybody that can play defensive tackle on the football team. We got issues in the secondary. We can't get anything going that way. It's on me to score 35 every week and hopefully win the game. And I don't think the team is there yet to where they're going to be able to just be totally dominant as a football team, so they're going to ride Joe Burrow still. And Joe's going to go, screw you. You better get this guy in here because if you want me to carry the team, I need my two guys. I need my Batman and Robin and Chase and Higgins. And I think Joe is going to make it very hard on them. And that's why, for the first time ever, I go, there might be a chance they actually get something like this done, Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins, because of the Joe Burrow effect.
Yeah, they're going to have
and
to.
It's not Batman and Robin. It's Batman 1 and Batman 2.
I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, really,
I didn't know what to come with there. Yeah, right.
But I'm just saying. I mean, you're using the more familiar term, but in this case, there is no Robin. In this case,
So this isn't even the peak. We haven't even gotten to the fact that this was pre releasing the whole Trey Hendrickson. We're giving him permission to go seek a trade. And that was because of the Max Crosby stuff that came out. And once you saw that number attached to Max Crosby, you're just like, great. This is going to fuck up the Trey Hendrickson talks because he's going to be asking for this much money and the Bengals aren't going to give him that much money. And that just fucked it all up. Now we're over here. Now we're at this point where we're worried about Joe Burrow here. And it's getting out of hand, and we're peak spiral right now if you're a Bengals fan. So let's listen in now. This is on the Trey, after the Trey Hendrickson is to seek a trade stuff came out this week, and then
Cincinnati,
time.
For the second straight year, edge rusher Trey Hendrickson has sought permission to seek a trade. This time, the Bengals granted his request. Cincinnati's front office allowing Hendrickson to seek out a new team. 30-year-old Hendrickson coming off his best season in the league, having led the NFL with 17.5 sacks. And there was some reaction around the World Wide Web yesterday. Our friend Dan Orlovsky had this reaction to the news. What the heck is Cincy doing? I'm surprised you didn't say fudge. What the fudge is Cincy doing? That would sound more like Orlovsky to me. But anyway, Mike T, as our former general manager here, what is Cincinnati doing?
I have no idea. And, typically I would say when you're the GM of a team, you look to your left, the head coach, the right, the owner, and you make sure you're on the same page. If I'm Cincinnati, I am significantly worried about Joe Burrow. He sat down with ESPN and Laura Rutledge at the Super Bowl. He talked about in great detail about what players should get paid, cap numbers and cash flow. And you're attacking Tee Higgins, who we're looking at here for the second consecutive year. And Trey Hendrickson, guys, has 35 sacks over the last 2 years. He's 30 years old. He's high character. Those guys never, ever, ever leave your building, ever. And
can we stop there and touch on that? Because this is the one thing that really stands out is the high character thing. Regardless of if you want to pay these guys money, right? Like, you can't just replace character and what he's been to this franchise and what he does for the franchise as an individual, as a person. That just cannot be replaced. And we tried to do that the past couple years, bring in these cheap guys, supposedly same talent. It doesn't translate the same. He's been part of the team that has come up from the ground. He was brought in here. They all got themselves to the Super Bowl. They were part of that upswing. And that is the culture here in Cincy. You can't just find talent and bring these guys in and replicate that. And it drives me insane when they just talk numbers here. Skill aside, you can't replicate the intangibles of some of these players. And it's just infuriating to watch.
Tee Higgins needs to get paid. And if I'm Cincinnati, I'm worrying about, is Joe Burrow all in here?
Is Joe Burrow, are they wasting Joe Burrow, and is he going to react to that?
Absolutely. To your point, you talked about being down at the Super Bowl. He was giving the play-by-play of how you do it, of restructuring contracts and putting money into signing bonuses. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals, the moment you draft Joe Burrow, the clock starts. Mm-hmm. So you know when it comes to cash spending, cap space, you always should be at the top of the league of spending money, and your cap space is going to be limited because you're going all in. So a guy like Trey Hendrickson, yes, he may be 30 years old, but he's still in the prime of his career. We're going to pay this guy to keep him here because we're trying to win it all right now. We're not trying to kick the can down the road and build for the future. When you get a quarterback like Burrow, you have to go in. And I look at the Bengals last season. Burrow had over 40 touchdowns, didn't make the playoffs. Jamar Chase was a triple crown, right? He didn't. And your defense, it was because of them. And now you're getting rid of your best player possibly.
So I'm going to try to figure out how Cincinnati is thinking here.
Yeah.
When I look at this whole ordeal and them giving or granting, Trey Hendrickson permission to seek a trade,
I'm saying to myself, okay, they're looking at this football team and defensively they're saying that we're not just one player away. We have multiple holes that we need to fill. They understand that Trey Hendrickson is 30 years old, and even though, yes, the last 2 years he had, 35 sacks combined, 17 and a half last year led the league, they were still in total defense 25th, pass defense 21st, run defense 19th, points allowed 25th, third down defense 23rd. So maybe they're saying if we're going to be awful anyway,
let's move to 32.
Harry, why are we paying $30 million a year?
Harry,
sad
so
is
let me
that
ask you a
to
question,
listen to
like,
this
given those
shit?
statistics, how does taking Trey Hendrickson out improve that?
Well, I think you're saying like they need to rebuild on defense.
That's
like,
what I'm
from
saying. Like
scratch,
more
right?
guys.
You got a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden who came from Notre Dame. Maybe it's one of those things where, hey, let's get younger. Let's bet on Chris Jenkins, who we drafted. Let's bet on Miles Murphy, who we drafted. Let's add more pieces that are younger to the equation and try to see if we can get better that way versus putting a lot of eggs in the basket with one person.
You know, one of the things that you guys used to hold me accountable as a GM was like who you paid in the locker room was the advertisement of what you stood for. And also, who did you let walk out the door, Mike? Like, I would get that all the time. I always felt like I had an accountability to the locker room. And I feel like if you're not paying Tee Higgins, who's been a point scorer and consistent since he's been a Bengal, if you're not paying Trey Hendrickson, who has led the league over the last few years, who are you paying? What do you stand for? And to going back to J-Mac's point about the detail that Joe Burrow provided, like he knows, he looks at Philadelphia, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith get paid. They just take care of Saquon Barkley. They just pay Zach Bond.
Yeah.
And players know what's going on. So to me, of course, players have to graduate. You can't pay them all. Philly's going to lose Sweat. They're going to lose Milton Williams. But there's certain guys based on production and character that they're non-negotiables. And Hendrickson to me is an easy one.
Yeah, and that's like that's exactly what we're going with here, right? Like there's some guys that are non-negotiables. These are the cornerstone pieces of your franchise. You keep them there and then you move the other pieces around. That is what needs to be done here. The fact that we're even having this discussion is beyond me. And just like you touched on there it's the locker room, it's the presence, it's what do you stand for? That's what these players are and the culture that's built here. What are you saying to the rest of the guys on this team? Not paying the guys that have done this and that have been there for your team. Last year, you basically said, go out and prove it. And these guys did it, and they did it tenfold. And now you got to unfortunately pay for that. And you're just like, like that doesn't make any sense to me. They went out there, they did their part. And then now we're in the prime of their careers and you're nickel and diming and beating around the bush and just non-committal on these things. I don't understand it. It baffles me. It really does. Get back here. I'm getting used to this OBS thing. It takes me a second to switch between.
I think it also goes back to with their front office and Mike Brown and Duke Tobin, the way they've done business for so long, where you're hampering your football team because you didn't handle things the right way in the past, and you're trying to make up for it right now currently.
Yeah, well, so we'll see where it goes. I mean, Hendrickson allowed to seek a trade doesn't mean he'll find one, right? Could end up back there, but obviously a lot to deal with in Cincinnati. We are just 3.
So that was that one. And then I wanted to go to the Andrew Whitworth one here. This one hits home. He speaks on this pretty well because obviously he's been in Cincinnati. He knows this. So we're going to go with the Pat McAfee show, kind of go over this last video here.
You obviously were synonymous with the Bengals for a long, long time. And I remember when you left the Bengals, there was some sort of something. I don't remember the exacts of it. Then you end up with the Rams. Yeah, some sort of something. Yeah, it feels like there's teams that are getting in that position now. Obviously, not just the Bengals, who Trey Hendrickson is allowed to go look for a trade. Sam Hubbard just retired. We thought that might open up some money for Trey Hendrickson, but they tell him he can go seek a trade because they got Tee Higgins, Jamar Chase, a lot of people they have to figure out over there. San Francisco 49ers seemingly have to deal with it every single year. Whenever you're talking about, we don't have to just talk about the Bengals, but obviously they're a part of this conversation as a whole. Whenever you have to pick and choose who you're giving money to and how much money you're giving to people, how uncomfortable does that actually get behind closed doors, do you think? That we don't talk about?
I think it's really uncomfortable. I think it's one of the things maybe the fan bases sometimes don't understand. This week isn't just about who's getting acquired or who's leaving and who we're cutting, there's a lot of emotions involved and a lot of nerves, because you're hoping that a lot of these decisions or quality decisions you're making as a personnel group, and you're saying, hey, we feel like we want to move money this direction, or we want to add money here to our team. And you look at the Cincinnati Bengals situation, which is a great one. Obviously Joe Burrow has been very outspoken about wanting Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase back, and the Bengals have always done things financially a certain way. And so it's kind of one of those things like, maybe, hey, listen, Joe, we're going to try to do this, but these are the people that are going to have to go, and there's going to be people that aren't going to be a part of this team if we're going to do it that way. So you look at Trey Hendrickson's situation, I think it's the Max Crosby deal that really probably sent this to this point, because now they go, wow, if that's the asking price, you probably need to go out there and see if there's another team that would offer you that, and then give us some compensation to really make it worth our while to move on.
$106.5 million extension for Max Crosby, completely earned. We're not saying
he deserves every bit of it.
Every play this guy plays, just like Trey Hendrickson.
It's crazy, man.
I mean, it is. The engine is obviously absurd, but the impact on the game that a pass rusher has, especially if you're Trey Hendrickson, the pass sack king last year, and then last 3 years most sacks out of anybody, it's like, I assume somebody will be like, yep, we will make that play for Trey Hendrickson. And the Bengals are going to be back at a spot that they're always in, which is get talent, can't keep talent. Business always gets in the way, because there's a lot of stats floating out there about paying Joey Burrow, and then obviously the Eagles pay Jalen Hurts. And somehow the Eagles are able to keep everybody, and the Bengals are very rarely ever able to keep anybody.
This is crazy.
How do you view the situation as somebody that's been so close to it in the past?
Well, the issue is the Bengals are never going to, issue out lots of guarantees and contracts, and unfortunately, they've just continued to be way behind times in that spot, because it's like that's the part of the business now, and eventually, you may have had an old way of doing things, but if you don't ever change, you're going to always get left behind in these situations. Continuously, they've let big free agents leave. Now, it's not that every team hasn't done that, but then they've also not been able to replace them. You look how many draft picks they've spent on the defensive side of the football since they lost Jesse Bates and DJ Reed and now possibly Trey Hendrickson, and they just haven't been able to find guys that match up to that standard of play. So if you can't pay them to stay, and you also don't draft their replacement, you're living in a world where we just keep spinning the circle, and you're going to keep putting yourself in this position where you're going to have to overpay to keep some talent. And right now, you look at it, you've gone this long with Tee Higgins being upset with his contract. Jamar Chase obviously needs to get taken care of. Those are the things I just hate to see teams do, to continue to allow it to fester. Make a decision. Pay the guy, move on from the guy, but stop letting it just linger in the locker room. Because to me, that's what you really see start to have an effect. Like what the Cowboys did with CeeDee Lamb and Dak last year. It just continues to fester your team, and it affects your locker room, because you create a bad vibe every single day about who's going to get paid that's deserved the opportunity to get paid. You got to make those decisions and make a clean cut of what we're going to do, and let's move forward.
And your stars get jaded towards the organization. And once again, the Bengals aren't the only team that does this. Historically, though, they've been a team that's been in the spotlight of doing this, because they get so many good players and then can't keep them. And it's like, have a guy right now. Are they going to be able to figure out the business to keep these talented gentlemen in Cincinnati? Whenever you provide a guarantee for somebody, ownership has to put that money up into a fund. So they actually have to have that money right now. You have to be able to put that in there. So that's obviously a question with the Brown family. Would they be willing to put that amount of money, because the Bengals are their only business? It's crazy, because there's other owners that like $106.5 million. Not that Mark Davis is this way, even though he sold to some funds, I think, some venture, 10% he sold. Yeah. There's some owners that can literally just $106.5 million just be like, yeah, fucking whatever. Yeah. We don't care. And then there's some ownerships that the team is all they got. And it's like fluidity of cash is not necessarily in abundance. I'll be excited to see how that kind of continues to work itself out. And you talk about taking care of guys early. J.J. Watt literally just said that yesterday. It's like, it's good for all parties to take care of somebody early. Saquon.
Yeah, so we can talk, obviously they're not going to have the same cash flow. Then sell the fucking team. Like, if you're not going to contribute everything you have here to winning, especially with the players you got now, I'd love to see the balance sheets pre-Joe Burrow and then post-Joe Burrow era, and how much money these players have actually brought in to the Bengals organization as a whole. And if you can't invest in these types of people and pieces as a business, what are you truly doing at the end of the day? How do you expect to make more money as the business goes on? Because us as fans, and we're investing in the players. We're not investing in you guys. We could care less. We are there to see the players. We're there to support the players. And if you can't support them, what is that telling us, right? Like, that's what I'm gauging from this. And this is the most frustrating thing is I've been a fan all my life. I've spent countless dollars going to see this team play. I've driven from Canada all the way to the United States multiple times. And I have season tickets now, and it's like, why would I pay my hard-earned money to go watch this team and give this organization more money when they're not going to turn around and support the players on the field, and they're going to give you, a mediocre product, and they're going to keep more of the cash to themselves and behind closed doors. To me, that's crazy, and that's not something I want to invest in, right?
Saquon Barkley's deal. How about that shit? Just
awesome.
Right?
You talk about another one, just like Max Crosby. Like that's what you want to see. You want to see this relationship with organizations where when a guy plays to a certain standard and you go, hey, you know what? This is what we want to encourage. A guy comes in here, the character he plays with, the style he plays with, how he achieved. We're going to make sure these kind of guys get taken care of early. That also helps us make decisions down the road. And that's what I think is the issue is sometimes the cat and mouse game of the team and the player and trying to figure out, all right, do we want to keep leveraging and holding off paying them? Like, the sooner you can make a commitment to guys, and that's really what the Eagles have done great. Hey, let's pick our 5, 6, 7 guys that we know without question the character they are and the football player they are. We're going to commit to them to move forward. And now that gives us the space to go, all right, when these other situations come up, can we make a move? Can we not? And that really is what, to me, separates what Howie Roseman's been able to do. Is not just these ghost years and these contracts people are talking about how they put them together, but he commits to guys that he knows this is a guy that I'm going to want in my organization no matter what. And it's the same thing that's been the criticism of the Giants with letting Saquon leave. How do you let talented football players who are also great characters, awesome for your culture, ever walk out of your building? To really validate what that number is that you say is too much is crazy to me, because you want good character people who are great football players. That's what you're in the business of acquiring. You don't let those people walk out of your building.
Yeah, and we watched it all unfold on that Hard Knocks offseason, and boy, that has all just come back completely the other way. And Mara, the owner, has to feel like a super genius.
Yeah.
He's probably, whenever he's going around conversation, have you seen Hard Knocks? I know ball.
I knew it.
I know ball. I told him, I tried to give him a hint. I tried to give him a tip, because remember it was said back in the day, just a few years back, that Mara was sick of telling his friends why his team sucks, which is why he invested a bunch of money. And then this whole situation happens, and Mara's like, I fucking know it. They don't let me.
The craziest comment, Pat, to that whole situation was when Sheen said that you don't pay a running back, 12 to 15 million, and have your $40 million quarterback hand the ball off to him. And I'm like, wait a minute, isn't 55 million what all the great quarterbacks are getting paid? So wouldn't you pay your quarterback less and then your running back more, and then that adds up to what the great quarterbacks are? Like, that isn't even, the math actually adds up to, that would be the equivalent of what those guys actually get paid, and that would be the dynamic if you have a quarterback for $40 million.
And you look at the
So
picture,
to me, it just never made any sense.
and you look at the picture right next to your head right now. It's like the Philadelphia Eagles, they paid a guy, a quarterback.
Yeah.
And he did hand the ball off.
A lot.
They handed the ball off more than they threw the ball, and they're still A-okay with paying Jalen Hurts the amount of money that they're currently paying him. It's a wild time, and it's crazy how this all works, but, maybe the Bengals, maybe the Giants, maybe all these teams, they figure it out this offseason. Let's go. Let's go.
Oh, man, it's sad. It's sad. Bengals fans, I'm sorry, we're peak spiral. Tuning into this crap. It's ridiculous that contracts haven't been signed yet at this point. I don't know how you have this much time to table all this stuff knowing that you got to do this in the offseason, and you're at this point right now. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. But I appreciate you guys tuning into the show. Hope you like the content. Bengals fans, get into the comments. Like, share, subscribe. I'd appreciate that. Give me some feedback and to keep the show rolling here. And hopefully we get some contracts signed here upcoming, get some good news, because Cincinnati's leaving us high and dry right now. But like I said, appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll catch you guys on the next one.